Alexander III of Macedon. His legend gives him the name Alexander the Great, but he could also be known as Alexander the Annihilator.
Anyone that gets in his way will be crushed. He will annihilate them.
Alexander considered himself a god. His admirers thought him a military genius. His enemies called him the devil.
In the East, he's a villain. His name in the East is Iskender, and he's Iskender the killer, Iskender the bringer of death, Iskender the destroyer of cities. He's the boogeyman.
Investigators will put Alexander's life under a microscope with a range of scientific tests. They'll show how he used the weapons of mass destruction of his day to defeat his enemies. And a psychiatrist will analyze the character of Alexander to uncover what drove him in his quest for world domination and what led him to the massacre of thousands. All to reveal how he stacks up against other ancients behaving badly. At age 16, Alexander wins his first battle. By 20, he is king of Macedon. By 30, he has conquered the known world. Alexander the Great is clearly a tyrant in a hurry, operating outside the normal rules of morality. But what motivates him to do so is less than clear.
I'll be looking to see whether Alexander was a military genius, whether he was pathologically self-obsessed, or merely a psychopathic killer.
Psychiatrist David Malott will examine key aspects of Alexander's character and position him on a unique behaving badly psychograph to reveal how he measures up against other tyrants from history, from Caligula and Genghis Khan to Napoleon. There's no shortage of horror stories. He not only destroys cities and slaughters soldiers, he also massacres innocent women and children.
If you were on the wrong side of Alexander, it would be one of the most damaging experiences you ever had.
He leads his army on a forced march across a desert, and 25,000 die. He kills his close friend in a drunken rage. He crucifies 2,000 men who dare to stand against him, and he may have assisted in the murder of his own father. It's a devastating rap sheet, but the historical record is clouded.
Ancient sources present different Alexanders: charismatic general, living god, megalomaniac, psychotic killer.
Almost all of the record is based on a text called The Deeds of Alexander, written during his life by his personal historian. This first-hand account has now been lost, but it was available to ancient historians who used it as a source, and each put their own slant on Alexander's character.
Plutarch presents Alexander as a charismatic leader bringing civilization to the barbarians. Curtius presents a darker tale of a young, idealistic conqueror that becomes a delusional dictator. The point is, it's difficult to understand who Alexander was because they're writing 400 years after the fact.
The hunt for the real Alexander begins in his childhood. He's born in 356 BC in the city of Pella in Macedon, straddling parts of what is now Greece, Macedonia, and Bulgaria. His father, King Philip II of Macedon, is a great warrior, but has a serious drinking problem. He's often absent on military campaigns, leaving behind his 7 wives and many children. There's even a rumor that Alexander is illegitimate. But Alexander does follow his father's career path as a formidable warrior. Under his father's command, Alexander's first military success occurs when he's only 16. His mother, Olympias, is hot-tempered, impulsive, and prepared to do whatever it takes to ensure that the next king of Macedon is her boy, Alexander.
He's definitely a mama's boy. Up until the day of his death, Alexander is writing corresponding with his mother. And it's true that Alexander was very similar to his father. They're both kings, they're both great military leaders, but it's his mother he was closest to.
For psychiatrist David Malott, it's a no-brainer. The root of Alexander's bad behavior lies with his parents.
Alexander is going to look up to his father as a great military hero. Nevertheless, Alexander's father is absent. However, Alexander's mother is on the scene. Alexander's mother is telling him, "You're special, you're meant to do great things."
Real-life drama convulses the royal family. When inside the theater at Vergina, King Philip is assassinated by one of his own bodyguards, Pausanias.
According to some of the sources, Aristotle and Diodorus, this is an open and shut case. Pausanias single-handedly murdered Philip of Macedon here in the theatre.
The person who has most to gain from the murder is 20-year-old Alexander.
Alexander himself never got on with his father. They had an extraordinarily rocky father-son relationship, not only because of worries about him being illegitimate, not only because of power play between these two individuals. And so we have to ask ourselves, did Alexander have a role to play in his own father's murder?
The story goes that Olympias is worried that one of Alexander's half-brothers and his cousin are being groomed for the throne instead of him.
Olympias and Alexander had good reason to wish Philip ill. And it was not long after that Philip was assassinated.
The one person who knows the truth about who's really behind Philip's assassination is the murderer himself, Pausanias. But he's killed by Alexander's henchmen before he can talk. The subsequent behavior of both Alexander and his mother is suspicious. Hardly the grieving widow, she honors her husband's killer by placing a crown on Pausanias' corpse. Alexander does the opposite. Though he hated his father, he plays the grief-stricken young man by stacking gold inside his father's tomb. More gold than any Macedonian king before him. It seems mother and son are playing all angles.
The opulence of this tomb, its magnificence, I think, may also be part of a case to think that Alexander had more than just a hand in his father's murder. Alexander was trying to cover up his own guilt and the suspicion that he might have been involved in his father's death.
But Alexander is not convinced that he's in line for the throne.
Soon murder was again in the air, his half-brother dead, and Olympias, Alexander's mother, took care of Philip's last bride and their male child. Alexander had the throne of Macedon all to himself.
Almost immediately, the 20-year-old rookie king is put to the test. The city of Thebes rebels against Alexander and Macedonian rule. They consider Macedon an inferior nation of northern barbarians. Alexander marches on the city, which is protected by walls up to 8 feet thick. No one had ever broken through these massive defenses. Greek sieges in the 4th century BC essentially consisted of armies throwing stones at each other, using increasingly more sophisticated launching platforms.
Got it?
Thebes had catapults shooting stone balls. But Alexander escalates by using a relatively new invention, the ballista, a kind of bunker-busting siege engine replicated here by ancient weapons experts.
You have arms in the configuration or shape of a crossbow, except that instead of one flexing spring, you have 2 stiff arms that do not bend, and they're suspended in a cord bundle, which is pre-tensioned, and then it's twisted. And that stores a lot of energy.
They set the tension and angle to fire a projectile at the van 300 feet away, the minimum distance that would put Alexander's army out of range of Thebes' catapults. But Alexander needs more than one direct hit. He needs many in the same place to weaken the 8-foot thick walls. In the first attempt, the projectile falls short by 50 feet. Still keeping the distance at 300 feet, the experts change the firing angle and increase the tension by pulling the ammunition further back.
A direct hit.
This proves that Alexander's men could have operated the ballista from beyond the firing range of the enemy's catapults.
Got some good shots off. We got a couple of solid hits in here. I think this was certainly our best shot here, and it really demonstrates the destructive power of this, and that we bent the entire side of the van. This could do a tremendous amount of damage.
Alexander's weapon makes it possible for him to smash through the walls of Thebes, ending forever the protection cities had behind thick stone walls.
From this point onwards, there was nowhere to run. There was nowhere that was safe from Alexander's army.
More than 6,000 people in Thebes are slaughtered. A once great city is brought down by a young man just out of his teens.
Don't be fooled by the heroic image. Behind the boyish good looks, Alexander's basically Saddam Hussein. One minute he's your best mate, the next minute he's cutting your head off. So when the city of Thebes rebels, he doesn't just punish it, he destroys it. He's basically saying to all the other Greek cities out there, cross me at your peril. And you know what? It works.
In Thebes, 30,000 survivors, including women and children, are sold into slavery. Alexander has terrified the rest of Greece into submission. They'll never rebel against Alexander again. Now, he's ready to terrify the known world. Alexander the Great, at just 20 years of age, has crushed the rebel city of Thebes. Now he plans a military campaign not even his father ever achieved. He's about to take on the mighty Persian Empire. The beachhead for Alexander's great invasion is the city of Troy, scene of legendary battles between Greeks and Trojans. For Alexander, it's a pilgrimage. He's been raised on stories of fabled Greek warriors, and most of all, the superhero, Achilles.
Alexander wanted to be another Achilles. This was his role model. Achilles' mother had told Achilles he had a choice in life. He could either die old and be forgotten, or die young and be remembered forever. Alexander, as he came here to Troy, had made his choice.
Alexander has good reason to feel close to Achilles and believe he too is supernaturally gifted. It's all his mum's doing.
Alexander's very ambitious mother enables him to feel special, tells him that he's going to do great things. In fact, she may have told him that he was descended from the gods. This is reinforced by his tutors, who give him the nickname Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior of all.
Now that he's paid his dues to his hero, Alexander heads for Persia, long-standing enemies of the ancient Greeks. Here, on the banks of the river Granicus, he confronts the forces of King Darius III.
With Philip out of the way, Alexander inherits the conquest of Persia, and he justifies this as a punishment for the Persians desecrating the Greek temples during the Persian War. It's a crusade, if you like, a war of vengeance against an ancient act of terror perpetrated more than a century ago. And of course, it's just an excuse. Alexander storms into Turkey and encounters a Persian army sent to stop him here on the banks of the river Granicus. And this is the first time that Alexander wins in typical style. 3,000 are surrounded and cut down. It's a bloody massacre. 2,000 more surrender, but they are sold into slavery by Alexander as a kind of warning not to cross it.
It's a stunning victory. According to the sources, Alexander loses fewer than 200 troops and gives strength to his claim to be the new Achilles. The Persians are on the defensive, and Turkey now belongs to Alexander.
Once he's secured Turkey, he doesn't do the obvious strategic thing. He doesn't race east to secure the ports of the Eastern Mediterranean before the Persians can reinforce them. Instead, he diverts north to this place called Gordium. That just seems really bizarre, unless you know the legend of the Gordian knot.
The story went that in the palace of the former kings of Phrygia there was a knot that tied an ox cart to a pin in the ground. And this knot was impenetrable. For centuries no one had been able to undo it. And the story went that the person who could would be Lord of all of Asia. Alexander couldn't resist the temptation to try his hand at this, the ultimate test. He came to Gordium, he stood in front of the knot, but instead of trying to untie it like everyone else had done, he simply took out his sword and slashed straight through the knot. This was a very Alexander-type solution, going straight for the jugular of the matter, preferably with a weapon in his hand. He left Gordium with the prophecy well behind him that he would be Lord of all of Asia.
Alexander is conquering countries in the ancient world like a tourist checks off fabled destinations on a schedule. And Alexander creates his own legend as he goes, that I play by my own rules. Untying knots, that's for the little people.
It's like cheating your way into Harvard, only later you tell everybody it's legitimate, you just found a novel way. Alexander needs continued evidence that he's special, almost divine.
Alexander is successful at spinning his own legend. The image of him as a handsome hero, built like a god, has survived to this day. His true physical appearance may not have been so godlike. One theory has him suffering from a deformity of the spines called scoliosis, because so many of his statues have him looking off to one side. Ancient sources also wrote that he was 4 inches shorter than an average man's height, then 5 feet 7 inches tall. But what Alexander possesses more than height or even looks is enormous self-confidence. His mother's hero worship helped, as does his self-proclaimed divine destiny. Together, these attributes will take him to the edge of the world and back again. 332 BC. Alexander the Great has beaten the Persians in what is modern-day Turkey. He's now seeking his next conquest. He targets the fortified city of Tyre on an island half a mile off the coast of present-day Lebanon.
Attacking the island of Tyre amounts to suicide. This is a city that can't be beat. You have to approach it by ship and attack these massive walls. Impossible.
But just like he proved with Gordium's magic knot, impossible isn't a word that Alexander accepts.
Alexander changes the rules. He extends the roadway from the mainland to the island, so the island is no longer isolated. It's now part of the coast.
The causeway allows Alexander to unleash his fearsome ballistas. They pound the city into submission, and the aftermath is horrific. Alexander loots the city, slaughters 8,000 citizens, and crucifies 2,000 enemy soldiers on this very beach.
Alexander's brutality, raping women and killing all the prisoners, sends shockwaves through all of Asia. And that psychological shock and fear prompts many cities to immediately open up their gates and submit to Alexander rather than face defeat and slaughter. The message is clear: do not mess with Alexander.
For Alexander, Tyre is further confirmation of his godlike destiny. Asia now belongs to him, just like the prophecy said.
Alexander continues to believe he's special. Whenever anybody resists him, he takes it as a personal affront. He not only defeats them, he massacres them. This also serves as an example to the rest of the world.
After 3 years of fighting, Alexander's empire covers 250,000 square miles, 5 times the size of modern-day Greece, and he's just 23 years old. Next on his hit list, Egypt. Ruled by Persia, Egyptians welcome Alexander as a liberator. Freed from Persian control, they crown him pharaoh. For Alexander, Egypt holds a special attraction. He takes a select group of men on a mysterious quest to a distant desert oasis.
If Alexander and his men run out of water, they're finished. It's a 1,000-kilometer round trip through the middle of the desert. If a sandstorm blows up, then the tracks that even the local guides rely upon here will be lost, and Alexander and his men will be lost forever in a sea of sand. So whatever there is at the oasis at Siwa, Alexander must have felt that it was worth that risk.
It's a sacred site on Alexander's to-do list, the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa Oasis.
As for any desert traveller, it must have been a most uplifting and magical moment for Alexander to have the endless yellow sands of the desert replaced by the blue water and the green of the palm trees at the oasis.
Alexander's not here for sightseeing. He's here for answers. The Oracle is a place where the ancients consult their gods via the resident priest. First, Alexander decides to kill any rumors that he might have been involved in his father's murder. He asks the priest whether the guilty have been punished. The priest says, yes, they have. Case closed.
If we think back to Alexander's own possible involvement in his father's murder, and the need to constantly rid himself of that accusation in the public eye, then his journey all the way here to Siwa to ask about this question starts to make a lot more sense.
Alexander has another question for the gods. Will he conquer the entire world? He gets his answer in garbled Greek.
The priest is said to have come out and tried to say to him in Greek, "O Paidion, O dear son," but his Greek wasn't very good, and so instead he came out with, "O Paidios, son of a god." Alexander left Siwa not just a man, but believing that he was a god himself.
Alexander hears what he wants to hear and believes what he wants to believe. His ego knows no limits.
The incident in the temple must have been music to his ears. It fed his narcissism, that grandiose sense of self-importance. Alexander has a need to be special and unique. He's already done great things, but he wants to amplify this view of being unique to the world around him.
Now Alexander is convinced he's a god. The oracle just said so. It's time to try out his new powers on the old enemy.
In the same year as Alexander had gone to the oracle at Siwa, he comes face to face once again with the Persian king Darius in battle at a place called Gaugamela.
The word is that King Darius has gathered an army of 250,000 men, 5 times as many as Alexander has.
But Alexander is not fazed. He relishes the opportunity to do battle with his enemy for the kingship of Asia and to settle the question once and for all.
In October 331 BC, the showdown between Alexander and the Persians occurs at Gaugamela, today's northern Iraq. The story goes that although outnumbered 5-1, Alexander maneuvers his small force with uncanny skill, and he personally leads his crack cavalry to punch a hole through the enemy lines at the critical moment. In addition to a keen mind for military tactics, Alexander succeeds by combining his cavalry skill with infantry armed with a simple piece of weaponry. His Macedonian infantry is armed with the sarissa, a razor-sharp spear 18 feet long. His men face the enemy using a phalanx formation. A team will test the success of the sarissa in the phalanx formation. In such a grouping, the long spears carried by every man, even the guys 4 rows back, become effective weapons. This has a distinct advantage over the style of leaving the fighting to the men in the front rank, one row at a time.
Now this is actually quite a fair contest, because the only one who would be engaging them would be the front man, whereas they've got whole rows of guys with their spears near me. All my buddies have got spears like this, but I have to get past each one at a time. But you can see I'm against, like, it's like a hedgehog, really.
Such a tactic gives Alexander a way to even out the odds for his greatly outnumbered army. The experts also want to test a controversial theory that the tight formation of sarissas could deflect arrow fire. Hay bales representing the Macedonian soldiers are arranged behind the protection of a forest of sarissas. But will it actually work? It does seem that the arrows are being deflected.
You hear that rattle when it hits a sarissa.
Only a close inspection will tell for sure.
This is one dead Macedonian right here.
Some arrows were deflected, but 80% got through. The theory of Alexander's impenetrable spear wall does not stand up to scrutiny. But Alexander's military genius is real enough.
The Macedonian army was without a doubt the best of its time. Nothing else comes close. With Alexander at its head, it never lost a battle. Military academies still study his tactics today. The Pentagon even released a monograph with an entire chapter devoted to the tactics of Alexander.
After the Battle of Gaugamela, Persian resistance collapses. Alexander is the uncontested ruler of Persia. Alexander is without doubt the most powerful man in the world, but the power has gone to his head. Ultimately, he'll pay the price for his arrogance. Alexander the Great, having been constantly on campaign for 5 years, rules the most extensive empire the world has ever seen. He is only 25 years old. Having crushed the Persians, he enters Babylon in triumph.
The city ran out to greet him. Priests and officials went to meet him. His way was strewn with flowers. They offered him gifts. They delivered the city, the citadel, and the treasury into his hands. And soon enough, the Babylonians would also crown Alexander king of the universe.
Not satisfied, Alexander marches on to Persepolis, where the Persian kings keep their treasure. He plunders 180,000 talents of gold and silver, the equivalent of $4.1 billion today. Alexander is a conqueror on a roll. But like his father before him, he drinks too much. And like his father, he's an ugly drunk. During one of Alexander's nighttime binges in Persepolis, one of the Greeks shouts, "Let's burn down the palace of Darius."
Alexander, in his state of drunken euphoria, agrees. And that night, the Greek soldiers burn the palace of Persepolis.
Alexander himself throws the first torch, and then watches as one of the most beautiful buildings of the ancient world goes up in smoke.
Alexander had to give his men something to celebrate their victory, and after all, this was a campaign of vengeance against the Persians. But in the cold light of day, as the ashes settled on Persepolis, perhaps Alexander started to regret his slightly euphoric decision.
For many of Alexander's loyal soldiers, the big adventure starts to lose its appeal. After 5 years of campaigning, they're tired and homesick. They're strangers in a strange land, surrounded by foreign customs. Even worse, Alexander begins to adopt some of these alien customs, and his men don't like it.
Alexander begins to enroll the Persians in his army. He begins to invite them to his court. And then he does the unthinkable. He starts to go native. He adopts their customs, he adopts their dress, and for the Macedonian soldier, this is entirely unacceptable. They didn't come here to become Persian, they came to conquer.
Alexander is going to have two reactions to the taking of Persia. First, it's going to validate his view that he's one of the great leaders of the world. On the other hand, the grumbling in the ranks of his men is going to enrage him. It's an insult to his narcissism.
Alexander still likes to model himself on the legendary warrior Achilles. And just as Achilles did, Alexander has a long-term male partner, Hephaestion, part of the inner circle who feed Alexander's sense of self-importance.
Alexander really cultivates the cult of personality like never before. Just like today we have dictators promoting the cult of themselves, Lenin or Stalin or Saddam Hussein, Alexander promotes images of himself on statuary and coins. He becomes ubiquitous. He's really building this sense of he's greater than humans.
One of the other ways in which Alexander stamped his authority onto his empire was by founding and then naming cities after himself, the most famous of which is Alexandria. Yet, by one count, Alexander may have named not just one city, but as many as 57 cities after himself, and another after his horse, and another one perhaps even after his dog. What this underlines is a similar type of behavior that also the dictators of Europe during the 20th century used. It underlines a need not just to stamp an authority onto the landscape, but a desire and a belief in oneself to stamp one's legend onto history for all time.
And the way to make history is to keep winning battles and expanding the empire. The troops may want to go home, but Alexander won't let them. He needs constant reinforcement of his desire for fame and glory.
Alexander wants to conquer the world because he needs to be special, the most powerful person in the world.
He's now so oblivious to those around him that he takes a Persian bride, unaware of how much it offends his soldiers.
Now, marrying a foreign bride, a Persian princess, is great politics for the Persians, but it outrages the troops. He is ruining his reputation with the Macedonians.
To make matters worse, Alexander orders his men, whenever in his presence, to perform proskynesis, the act of prostrating oneself in obedience. To the Greeks, it is an honor reserved only for the gods. If Alexander knows about the discontent, he shows no sign of caring. Soon, an assassination plot is in the wind.
A man called Philotas and his father Parmenio were accused of trying to assassinate Alexander. It was a serious charge, but the reason Alexander took it so seriously was that not long before, Philotas had bragged to Alexander that all his success in military campaigns was not due to his own genius, but to that of Parmenio, his general, Philotas' father. It was this insult to Alex's ability and success that made Alexander perhaps take the conspiracy theory so seriously.
Alexander decides to dispose of this little problem quickly.
He didn't wait for a trial to be conducted. He sent assassins to have Philotas and Parmenio murdered.
Parmenion has been Alexander's loyal lieutenant for many years. Alexander's ability to coldly murder him shows Alexander's underlying psychopathic behavior.
But it's just the beginning. Other assassins are lurking in the wings.
Just 2 years later, the same thing happened. A friend of Alexander overstepped the mark, was soon accused of trying to kill Alexander, and instead found himself dead.
Alexander grows increasingly more paranoid. The Great One is starting to lose it. Alexander turns to the bottle, again, with devastating consequences.
In yet another drinking bout with his companions, Alexander turns the conversation to his father Philip. Alexander laments the fact that Philip never recognized him for his achievements. Clitus, one of Alexander's generals, steps in and complains, "You have disowned your father. You say that you are the son of a god." Philip anyways is a better general than you ever would be. Enraged, Alexander steps up, grabs a spear, and runs through Clitus, killing him instantly.
According to the sources, Alexander is filled with remorse. He attempts to kill himself with a spear and has to be restrained.
Clitus was one of Alexander's oldest friends, contemplating suicide and withdrawing to his tent for 3 days. Could have just been a clever dramatization, something to satisfy the troops. But this seems to be something that's felt. There's regret. This is a crime of passion and exasperation brought about by intoxication.
Now the assassination plots come fast and furiously. Alexander's world is unraveling, and his grip on power is slipping through his hands. Things are getting tough for Alexander. Tensions continue to rise in his troops, and his relentless progress eastward slows to a crawl. By the time Alexander reaches the border of India, his empire is 9,000 miles across. He resorts to massacring whole town garrisons, reneging on promises that they will survive if they surrender. Alexander wants to keep pushing east, but after an epic battle at the Hydaspes River, his troops finally rebel.
Alexander's men are tired of being away from their homes and families for more than 8 years. They are also increasingly fed up with Alexander's dictatorial style of leadership, so much like that of the Persian king which he had replaced. And on that note, they had come into Asia to avenge the Persian king's wrongs that he had done to Macedon. They had now done that. So what were they still doing here, except for adding to Alexander's own empire and getting nothing for themselves in return?
It's become pretty obvious to Alexander's men that he's never going to stop. He's just going to keep on going until there's no more world to conquer. And that was never part of the deal. But of course this creates a huge problem for Alexander, because he can't be seen to back down in the face of his men, but at the same time he can't keep going without the support of his men, and he knows it.
Alexander's commanders finally devise a plan to end the continuous campaigns. They pretend they receive a divine omen ordering them to stop fighting and head home.
This is a fascinating psychological event. The army's tired, they want to go home. Alexander wants to press on and conquer the world. They need a mechanism that will both preserve the army and not injure Alexander's narcissism. The divine omen is the perfect face-saving device.
Alexander agrees to turn back, but he doesn't make it easy. Instead of following a route along the coast, he insists on going west across the Gedrosian Desert in what is now southern Iran. It is one of the most forbidding places on Earth. Scorching heat and shin-deep sand. There's not enough water and soon, no food. The men eat their own horses and continue on foot.
Why should Alexander choose to cross this inhospitable desert, especially when he could have simply put his men on ships and sailed them most of the way home? Now some say it's because he wanted to punish his men for having refused to follow him any further east. His men paid for their lack of loyalty with their lives.
25,000 men, more than 3/4 of Alexander's force, die in the desert. By the time he returns to Persia, Alexander is a far harsher ruler. He accuses some governors of crimes in his absence and has them executed. Mutinous soldiers are rounded up and put to death. And when his closest friend, Hephaestion, dies of a fever in 324 BC, Alexander lashes out in all directions, blaming the innocent for his friend's death.
The doctor who was unable to save Hephaestion's life is executed on Alexander's orders. Local users are slaughtered over the man's body, and Hephaestion is now worshipped as a hero. All this builds a picture of Alexander as a man who has gone beyond what is expected as the norm in Greek society, both in terms of his relationships with men and in terms of how he is expected to behave as king.
Alexander never recovers from his friend's death. In Babylon, he uncorks the wine bottle one last time.
After yet another night of binge drinking, Alexander complains of severe stomach pains. He's then hit with a fever that rages for 12 days.
It is only 8 months since Alexander's closest friend died, with almost identical symptoms. According to historian Arrian, Alexander slowly loses the use of his legs and is confined to bed. He then loses the use of his arms and the ability to speak. Symptoms which point to what doctors call ascending paralysis. Just a few days short of his 33rd birthday, in 323 BC, the greatest conqueror the world has ever known dies. Emergency room physician Rahim Vallani has narrowed down the cause of Alexander's death. The most obvious candidate for the fatal illness is malaria.
We know that malaria was endemic at that time, and we know that Alexander traveled to many different countries and many different regions. So he could have contracted malaria at any point in any one of these regions that were endemic to malaria. In this particular instance, malaria I don't think is the culprit that caused Alexander's death.
Despite what seemed like symptoms of malaria, Dr. Vallani now believes there's a more likely explanation.
What I would conclude is Alexander died from typhoid fever, given his symptoms that fit classically with this presentation. Somebody may not have washed their hands properly or may have got contaminated in the food or the water, and he may have picked it up from that place. In this particular situation, typhoid fever is associated with an ascending paralysis. What happens with the bacteria is it gets into your bloodstream and causes an overwhelming sepsis response. As your blood vessels dilate, you lose your blood pressure, you become comatose, and you die from the infection itself.
It is said that on his deathbed, when asked who should the empire pass to, Alexander says, "To the strongest." Alexander marched over half the circumference of the earth. Along the way, he never lost a battle, and he stacked up a huge body count. He became a bloodthirsty megalomaniac who believed himself a god. He murdered loyal companions, and may well have had a hand in his own father's assassination. So where does such behavior put him on a psychological scale of tyrants? Was he a psychopathic, thrill-seeking killer like Caligula, or a cold, gold-driven killer like Genghis Khan?
Alexander has a pattern of excessive and needless cruelty without remorse, so he has some features of a psychopathic killer. However, he's not all about bloodlust. Much of the violence is very goal-directed.
That makes Alexander a little of both, goal-directed with a touch of the psychopath. And there's another key factor, his narcissism.
Alexander scores very highly on a narcissism scale. His need to be special, his need for the world to know that he's special, his need to be connected to the gods, all show that he's a narcissist.
So who in history shares similar character traits with Alexander?
Alexander reminds me of Napoleon, the military commander. They both pursue their own aims. They both want to conquer the world. They both can't get enough glory. And they both believe they are right.
Driven by obsessive self-belief, Alexander built the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Though he had a cruel streak a mile wide, his personal biographer made sure he was remembered for his military prowess. That's why, over 2,000 years later, he's still known as Alexander the Great.